Hey everyone, Wolf Lord Rho here. Today we continue Fulgrim week with a look at his relations with his brother Primarchs, how the unique nature of the Phoenician affected those relationships. General spoiler warning to begin, as today we will be referencing events from across the Warhammer 40k universe. As always, I really recommend you read the stories for yourself first without spoilers, as that's the best way to enjoy the lore for yourself. But with that said, let's waste no time and just jump straight in. Fulgrim. He's a bit like Marmite. You either love him or you hate him. He's not really a Primarch you have no opinion on one way or the other. And I think that's very much a mindset that translates to his brothers as well. The Phoenician appears to have certainly divided opinion, his brotherhood with the Gorgon renowned for example, but his differences with the Khan equally so. And well, today I wanted to take a look and discuss some of those relationships with his brothers, the ones before his fall. The varied opinions of Fulgrim himself, and his brothers of him. A few of the most intriguing moments for me. And I think the most obvious place we have to start is with his beloved brother Ferrus Manus. Now, the close brotherhood between these two Primarchs was one of the foundational pieces of the heresy. One brother falling, the other remaining loyal. Ferrus's death was the marker to the galaxy that things will never be the same again. And the truth is, it was two Primarchs who died in that moment. For the Fulgrim we knew was entirely lost with his brother. And it was within Ferrus Manus' Primarch novel Gorgon of Medusa that we got a clear answer on why Ferrus was so fond of the Phoenician. After remembering a question from Perturabo on what on earth they actually have to talk about, Ferrus reflected that they actually had a lot. Ferrus knew too that he had a reputation for being enigmatic, but there was no aspect of his character that had not been moulded perfectly to his nature. He was difficult to like, and he liked his brothers little enough. With one exception. To his mind they were more akin than any Primarch was to another, or the Emperor to his sons. Their differences, so pronounced, were superficial, and it had taken neither being long to recognise what it was they shared. Perfection. Both carried a need for it, strove for it, demanded no less from those bound by blood and love to call them father. Only in their methods did they differ. Where Fulgrim would scale any obstacle to reach the heights beyond, Ferrus would shatter it through raw determination and walk over the rubble of its defiance. The ultimate goal and the conviction to claim it first were the same. So here, we have a revelation that Fulgrim was in fact pretty much the only brother Ferrus Manus truly liked, and he liked his brothers little enough. That's not to say Ferrus didn't like them at all, but it's clear here he was only truly fond of Fulgrim because of that shared passion, that shared logic. For all of those outside differences, those completely different mannerisms and style, they both at their core were striving for perfection. Interesting how that pursuit led to Fulgrim's downfall, yet for Ferrus it was something that had limits. His lament and future intentions to stop his sons embracing bionics, for example, to end their flesh is weak mindset. As much as Fulgrim felt destined to fall to Slaanesh in a lot of ways, maybe had things worked out differently, the presence of Ferrus could have prevented that, helped him realise the folly before it went too far. It's interesting to consider. But it's that pursuit of perfection in Fulgrim that leads us to a revelation on his opinions in regards to his brothers, how it affected his relationships. Within Fulgrim's Primarch series novel, The Palatine Phoenix, we found out that the discovery of Rogel and Rebute is something that rankles at Fulgrim within. Not necessarily out of a dislike for them personally, but undoubtedly out of a jealousy. While Fulgrim's legion had been devastated by the Blight, leaving it to number in the mere hundreds, and thus chained to Horus's side, Rogel and Rebute already commanded empires of systems by the time of their discovery. Fulgrim had waged incalculable wars to save but a single world, while Guilliman and Dawn had ruled entire systems. The legions awaiting them had numbered in the hundreds of thousands, and had swelled to greater heights since. His had numbered 200, and though their list of honours was greater than any, it was poor consolation. Of them all, he thought Russ would understand. Fenris was but one world, as Chemos was. But Russ was arrogant. For him, Fenris was the only world worth the name, and the galaxy too small to contain its magnificence. He did not, would not, see the great tapestry unfolding around him. Only Horus shared Fulgrim's understanding. Only Horus saw the galaxy for what it was, and understood what the Great Crusade really meant. The struggle towards perfection was the only task worth contemplating. The form that perfection took was debatable, obviously, but it must be achieved. So again here, much like with his relationship with Ferrus, it certainly appears that strive for perfection absolutely dominates Fulgrim entirely, that it affects even his relations with his fellow brothers. A jealous streak towards Rogel Dawn and Rebute Guilliman, even though there was no real comparison. Fulgrim barely had a legion. It was impossible for him to compare their feats, yet he just couldn't help himself. And with Russ, you get that sense of a true hurt there. Of them all, he'd thought Russ would understand. Fenris was but one world, as Chemos was. But Russ was arrogant. For him, Fenris was the only world worth the name. You can feel a bit of that pain there, that he was looking and expecting Russ to understand, and then it was thrown in his face. But it speaks to a lack of understanding of Russ on Fulgrim's part, because to know Russ at all, you'd surely know he has no interest in empires, that everything revolves around Fenris. It's the very heart and soul of his and his legion's nature. He's not dedicated to empires, he's dedicated to the Emperor. Here, Fulgrim is lamenting how every single one of his 7 brothers, with 8 only found at this point, advised him against striking out alone, that his legion was too small, barely enough for one ship. So you have to think that'd surely leave a bit of resentment within. And perhaps here we see why it was Horus who was able to sway Fulgrim to betrayal, and not Ferrus keeping him loyal, as it was only Horus Fulgrim believed could share his view. A pretty small passage there, one that's probably often overlooked, but it reveals a lot. And it's another subtle step on Fulgrim's slide downwards to chaos, and a glimpse of how easily he can be offended. Because let's be real, it's not like his brothers are advising against it to be malicious. It's the Great Crusade. The simple fact is they wanted the best for Fulgrim. that he needed a legion to lead first, to take time and rebuild its numbers. When you don't have enough legionaries to fill a single ship, I think that's a valid concern. And an interesting side note here, but there's even a mention of one of the lost Primarchs going against Fulgrim here too, normally contemplative, accusing Fulgrim of hubris. It's not much, but whenever you get a mention of one of the lost Primarchs, it's always worth mentioning. Now, moving on, one of the Primarchs Fulgrim appears to have had a fond relationship with is Magnus the Red, as he was one of the Primarchs who greeted his brother upon his arrival at Nicaea within 1,000 suns. Lord Sanguinius said Ahriman in wonder, and brother Fulgrim completed Magnus. Firmitas, Utilitas, Venastas. It seemed they heard him, for they smiled in genuine pleasure, though the words must have surely been lost in the feral growl of the Stormhawk's cooling engines. The Primarchs were illuminated in the reflected glow of the volcano, their smooth features open and welcoming. They wore the faces of eager siblings pleased to see their brother, though they had seen one another only recently at Ulanor. Magnus stepped towards Fulgrim, and the master of the Emperor's children opened his arms to receive his brother's embrace. They spoke words of greeting, but they were private, and Ahriman allowed himself to look away from the majesty of the Phoenician's countenance. It's a brief moment, a meeting of brothers on the cusp of such a defining decree, but it's no coincidence that two of Magnus's well-liked brothers are greeting him here, considering what we know is in store. So we know that this must absolutely be a genuine warmth between all three, which isn't necessarily too much of a surprise, as Magnus seems to get along with most of his brother Primarchs. Even in his arguments with Russ, there was always a glint that on some level they enjoyed the arguments. Now that Latin utterance by Magnus, Firmitas Utilitas Venastus, translates to meaning strength, utility, and beauty. And it certainly seems to me as he's using it to describe both of his brothers. So it's a clear holding of high esteem, the respect that Magnus holds for the Phoenician. And I particularly like the fact that there's no references here to the flamboyance of Fulgrim, no mention of the spectacle. This is just brothers greeting brothers. It's one of the few times you feel you're witnessing the true man within. It's something I wish we'd get a bit more of when it comes to Fulgrim. Now, maybe two of the most intriguing mentions of Fulgrim actually come from brothers talking about him rather than to him. The first is within Aurelian, taking place after the eruption of the heresy. Lorgar was one of the only Primarchs to immediately realise that the being masquerading as Fulgrim was not his brother at all, during the fairly short storyline of the true Fulgrim being trapped within a painting, his body being possessed by a demon. And it's after Lorgar demands to be shown to his true brother that we get a sense of the respect that Lorgar had for the Phoenician, even despite his apparent lack of it in return. "My brother," Lorgar whispered, "what a man you were, a paragon among wolves and wastrels." He always enjoyed flattery, Fulgrim smiled. "Do you so quickly forget how he sneered at you, Lorgar? Does his disregard slip from your memory so fast?" "No," the word-bearer shook his head, as if reinforcing the denial. "But he had every right to think less of me, for I was never whole, not until now." That line by Lorgar there, a paragon among wolves and wastrels, that's some real high praise. Paragon's essentially saying Fulgrim was what a Primarch should aspire to be. So you get the sense that maybe Lorgar appreciated that pursuit, that dedication to perfection, even with Fulgrim's clear lack of respect in return, something that Lorgar didn't even deny. And let's compare that directly to Corax's opinion of Fulgrim, as glimpsed from a very brief reference in Lord of Shadows, in a conversation with Rabute Guilliman. In Guilliman apologising for what Corax must think of his tastes, overgrand compared to the simple Corax, it inevitably leads to a comment on Fulgrim. "You must think our culture vulgar." "Not at all," said Corax. Guilliman smiled at the polite lie. "Compared to some, yours are restrained," continued Corax. "Fulgrim's tastes must be overwhelming for you. Balding the pride of the Emperor was like being punched repeatedly in the face by a perfumed fist. I was glad to be off it." Guilliman laughed. "I wouldn't tell him that. He's terribly proud of that ship." It's a harmless joke between brothers, but it reveals an interesting contrast between Lorgar and Corax's views. You get the sense here that Corax doesn't have much respect for Fulgrim at all, especially in regards to his tastes. Yet Lorgar comparatively had huge respect for the Phoenician that was, in spite of their differences. So it really shows how individual and unique each of the Primarch relationships were. That assumed friendships and bonds based on similar traits, or rivalries on differences, can't really be assumed at all. And that through Fulgrim's strive for perfection, he found a respect fostered from Ferrus, who found a kinship, from Lorgar, who found a brother to be admired. Yet it too wounded him easily, if others failed to understand his logic, his desire. As with Russ, and the other brothers who felt it not time for his legion to act alone. Their motivations nothing but pure, but that pride of Fulgrim was hurt regardless. And you get the sense that that's a resentment that Fulgrim carried with him ever after. A moment in time that he wouldn't forget. A pride that could push him to unbelievable feats. Yet a pride that, if he heard Corax's view of him, would have led to irrevocable differences between the two. Yet within it all, beneath the strive for perfection, and the overwhelming pride, the jealous streak that he possessed, was the man that Fulgrim was. A man witnessed in a simple fond reunion with Magnus. A man who found understanding in Horus. A man that ultimately proved to be the root of his downfall. But as always everyone, what do you think? What do you think of Fulgrim's relations with his brother Primarchs? Are you surprised by some of the fond relationships that he had? Are you surprised that he had such a jealous streak when it came to Rabute and Rogel? That his pride was so easily wounded by Russ? And are you surprised to see that Lorgar held him in such high esteem, despite Fulgrim's looking down on his brother? And do you feel that that understanding with Horus was the true root of his downfall? The one brother he truly felt, at the end of the day, understood him completely. As always everyone, leave your thoughts in the comments below. Huge thank you to all my subscribers, your support truly means a lot to me, it really does. If you're new, please consider subscribing to help the channel grow. And if you enjoyed this particular vid, then why not drop a like on it too. But with that said, I am off, and I'll see you all again real soon.